To acknowledge that we are on Darug and Gundungurra land, and it's such a key part of so many tourism businesses in the mountains. It was really interesting to do the research around the exact number of jobs that are generated by tourism. And according to the Tourism and Transport Forum, it was interesting to see that it's 3,200 direct jobs, and we all know that those then lead to masses of indirect jobs. And that 13.9% of all businesses in the mountains are connected to the tourism industry. That means I'm one of the other, however many percent it is. I'm a small businesswoman, and I fit into that category that many of you fit into, where it's that self-employed or micro business. And I know we have a really large number of small businesses. In fact, 93% of the businesses in tourism fit in that area, and then we have the larger ones, some of whom are represented in this room too today. Look, I'm going to talk a bit about the small business and tourism side. I think you can see, I hope you'll be able to see that what Labor has done is an indication of the things that we want to do with tourism and small business as we move forward, but also some of the more fundamental issues that really have an impact on your businesses. I think the federal settings are really important. You know, you've had some pluses. You know, lower interest rates mean that people have had money to travel, but that higher dollar means they've had a real incentive to travel overseas and a disincentive for people coming here. So, you know, there are those macro settings that will obviously impact your businesses. Louise talked about the amount of money spent. I'm really reluctant to just categorise that the investment in tourism as being solely the money that comes from tourism-specific things, because I think one of the key jobs of federal government is not just to give money to tourism. And in fact, yesterday, the Tourism Minister, Gary Gray, announced that there would be another $12.5 million this financial year, and that's part of the $48.5 million over 4 years. So that's the second year of funding. But I think the really key thing for us to do is to help people get here, and when they get here, to help them have a great experience. And there's a couple of key ways we've done that, and they all come down to infrastructure. That's where the federal governments really make a difference. Now, we all know that one of the key impediments to people coming to the mountains has been the Great Western Highway, you know, affectionately known as the GOAT track. It's been getting better, but it's Labor that's actually invested $300 million to get that road finished. And I'm sure we all have stories where people have said, rather than go to the mountains, we went to the Southern Highlands or we went to the South Coast because I just can't face that road driving home on a Sunday afternoon. So I think that's one of the really fundamental things that we see as our role, to make sure people can get here easily. It's also important to me that there's infrastructure that isn't just road. The rail is really significant too. And in fact, I was staggered to see that Tony Abbott has said he is not going to invest any funds in public transport because he doesn't see that as a federal government role. Well, I think it's really key that for tourists who want to move around Sydney and connect with trains coming to the mountains, that there is good capacity to move around Sydney. So Labor definitely sees that the federal government has a role in public transport, not just in road building. There's another thing that we do, and that is we help people have a good experience when they get here. And there's things that we've done already. One of the commitments I made at the last election, and I always like to remind people, and remember, I lost the last election. And even though I lost it, 2 major infrastructure commitments were kept by Labor in the mountains. And one of them is in Glenbrook National Park. And Tourism and Transport Forum has said that that is one of their top 10 priorities, to have really good investment in national parks. So in Glenbrook, $2.6 million is being spent as we speak. There's been, the first thing of course, a decent toilet block. Next thing, decent car parking at Jellybean. And I mean, it is lower mountains tourism, but, and I know a lot of people focus on upper mountains tourism. But I think there is a real opportunity in the mountains for us to develop an industry that is very vibrant at that end of the mountains as well. And hopefully once we get people there, they then get tempted to come up the mountains. So I think that is one of the most significant improvements in lower mountains national parks that we've seen in 50 years. In fact, they tell me, I turned 50 last week, and they tell me that the infrastructure there was built in 1963 and not much has been done to it since. The other specific tourism thing we've done very recently was the $500,000 to kickstart the Great Mountains Trail. Now, there's bike people in the audience. That is clearly an advantage we have over a lot of areas. So to be able to develop that Great Mountains Trail, a walking and riding track, is going to give people a reason, not just outside people a reason to come, but locals a reason to get out and experience their own community. And you know, they're going to be stopping at your cafes. And that might even inspire us lower mountains people to come up and stay a night, not just come up for a day. And that's the sort of thing where it's up to you as entrepreneurs to plant those pictures in our head, but it's up to the federal government to help provide that infrastructure. We've also done some really significant funding. One Blue Mountains tourism operator described one of our funding rounds as being the best funding for tourism that he had ever seen. And that was where we offered dollar for dollar up to $250,000 for private investors to invest to improve and expand the significance and the attractiveness of their property or their business. And it was great to see that the Carrington was able to be successful in that grant to work on its emporium, and we're all looking forward to eating in the new restaurant there soon. I know the money's in the bank, the work must be starting very soon. And we've also funded for a third time the sculptures at Scenic World, which are a great way to bring people up to do something extra. It brings up a different group of people and it connects a different group of potential future tourists to the mountains. So in just the last week there was $93,000 announced. And that's the third round of funding, and Lizzie Marshall at Scenic World is really creating a niche there that's going, every year goes wider and wider out to not just the arts community, but anyone who likes coming to see something a bit different in a national park setting. So they're the sorts of things that I will certainly be pushing for us to keep doing. Allowing small businesses and medium-sized businesses to invest in their own business where we're carrying some of the risk, but the government's giving us something really tangible to help alleviate that risk. The other big thing for the upper mountains and for all of the mountains, tourism-wise, is going to be the National Broadband Network. You know, being able to use the opportunities that provides. As a business person, and I'm a business person who works from home, and I really get sick of watching the dial go round and round and round while I'm waiting for uploads or downloads. You know, and it will come. I know upper mountains people are saying, but when? Well, we know it's getting to Lyndon by July 2016. And, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that it has to then keep coming up the mountains. It is guaranteed to get to everybody as part of the 10-year rollout. But the way NBN works is it works through an area and it doesn't leave an area till every house and every business is connected. So that will give the sort of uploads time. You know, ours is looking at 100 megabytes a second upload versus theirs at 25. And 40 download times, and 40 megabytes a second upload times, which is, you know, streets ahead of what we've got. And that's what should have been happening a decade ago. We should have been investing in this infrastructure, but we're now playing catch up. One of the things from a tourism perspective that strikes me that people haven't thought about is the visual impact of the Coalition's NBN policy. It's got boxes, and I'd encourage you to Google Britain's National Broadband Network, and you'll see the sort of box that ends up on every street. They're big boxes, they're targets for graffiti, and in fact there's been court cases because people have had no choice about whether they're outside their house or not. And from a visual perspective, we know, for instance, in Katoomba and Leura, that graffiti is the scourge of, you know, making the place look good. So have a look at that and see whether you really want those sorts of boxes in your street. In terms of the other area of infrastructure, you know, giving people things to do when they come up here and creating a space for it, councils are doing a fantastic job of identifying those sorts of things. And the federal government's worked really closely with council over the cultural centre, which predates me, and then the Springwood Civic Centre. You know, so for a council to have the vision, to think of investing in those things, to bring people to have really high quality experiences, whether it's art, whether it's the arts more broadly. And I think that the moves to get the Katoomba Theatre Company mean when people come to stay, they've got another reason to stay another night for those of you who are involved in accommodation. And hopefully that means that in the daytime, they might want to go out and do some rock climbing, although it's never really appealed to me. The other thing that people talk about is all of our policy, a lot of our policy is driven by the Asian Century White Paper, as part of Tourism 2020. What we know is that we are getting a lot more sophisticated Asian tourists coming. They travel quite widely, often to Europe. They're starting to travel really independently. They're used to big cities and they come to us because of the pristine environment we have. So that's why I think Labor's environmental policies are absolutely pivotal to us not only maintaining World Heritage status. We are the only World Heritage area within 2 hours of a city in the world, and that's a real draw card. So being able to have a strong policy to ensure climate change doesn't wreak havoc. I would have thought that the biggest threat to tourism up here on a year-by-year basis is fires. Because you only need one fire. It doesn't matter if it was in Winmalee, people stop coming to the mountains. And we've all seen that. We saw it in 2000, we saw it in 1994. And if we can do something that helps ameliorate and reduce the amount of fire that we have, that is the sort of sustainable tourism industry we have. Every fire, people tell me every fire takes several years for the tourism industry to recover from, even if it was nowhere near you. The other environmental things, there's a lot of talk about cutting red tape. What I'm concerned about is the cutting of green tape. That again poses a real threat. There's been some references to things being terrible. Look, when you're a small business person, you have ups and downs, and you are a little bit of a cork bobbing on a sea. But what I find is small business is incredibly resilient. Entrepreneurs look for opportunities, and I see that it's the federal government's job to try and create opportunities as well as allow you to take them. But there's some really practical things that I think we need to consider. For the first time ever, Labor had a Minister for Small Business, and that minister was in Cabinet. That Minister for Small Business, Chris Bowen, is now the Treasurer. And so there is a much deeper understanding around it. But essentially, I think we do need more small business people in Parliament. I absolutely think there are masses of opportunities and that we as a group are not represented. I don't believe that the Liberals consider small business. I absolutely think that Labor has some idea, but I don't think that it's perfect. So, in fact, for small businesses, that's one of the key things that drives me. There are things we can do, and I'd love to have the chance to work with small businesses. Particularly businesses that I see us as a regional area. We're not always considered that. We're considered regional when it's going to cost them less, and we're considered city when it'll cost them less. But I think as a regional area, we can really shape an identity and come up with some policy settings that will make our lives easier, but more to the point, allow us to employ more people. And when I look at small business and tourism up here, I see it as the first place our kids work. And I want that experience to be a great experience for them, and I want you guys to be able to employ more of our kids. I have a 19-year-old, there's self-interest here. And all my son's friends are starting to work in local businesses. So I would like to really empower you to be able to employ more of those kids, because the bottom line for me is that jobs is what keeps this economy turning, and it's what gives people money to spend at your places. So that's what I'll be working for. Thank you.